teachers in supporting the well-being of the students? And also, how do you become an empathetic teacher? We use the word empathy very loosely these days, and sometimes we don't apply to our day-to-day or our teaching lives as well. So again, it's just kind of to have an idea of how to be an empathetic teacher and what does that mean for each person. So the aim is by the end of this workshop, I'll hope that teachers are equipped with knowledge, skills to integrate empathy into their practices, to create a supportive and inclusive classroom environment, to promote student and teacher mental health and well-being as well. I suppose that's very important. Although there's emphasis on empathy and mental health awareness for students, but it's also very much important that teachers as well take this very serious as well. So just to kind of promote the importance of also your mental health. To understand the importance of empathy in education. Why is this important? Like, what are we talking about? Why should I, as a teacher, include empathy in how I teach, So the aim would also identify and address barriers to empathy implementation. I suppose we're in a country where there is a lot of barriers, not even just even in Nigeria, anywhere, I suppose across the world, there are barriers to implementing anything generally. So you would always, I suppose, there will always be an issue to implementing whatever it is. However, the work starts with the individual. So this is really the aim of the workshop. We're not trying to change, I suppose the teaching sort of curriculum in Nigeria or anywhere else. It's just as an individual, how can you be intentional about, promoting empathy as a teacher or as a person? And the aim as well is to learn practical strategies for cultivating empathy in interaction with students. So how do you cultivate it? What do you do? How do you do it? How do one know that you're showing empathy? Enhance your engagement, the student engagement, and to contribute positively to the mental health outcomes of our students. Okay, thank you. So on a scale of one to five, so five being very high, mental health is really important in our education. We need to have more discussion about it. We need to be more open about it. We need to start seeking sort of like support around it. So 100% important, because if our mental health isn't, taken on board as teachers, it definitely will have an impact in everything else we do with our students. So the second question there is, what's the distinction between empathy and sympathy? Does anyone wants to answer that, or I can go straight into having a discussion about that. So what's the distinction between empathy and sympathy?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good
afternoon, ma'am.
All right. I think the difference between empathy and sympathy is, I think empathy is when it involves the feeling of someone. Okay. And I think sympathy doesn't. So I feel sympathy is that it involves understanding how someone else feels or someone's emotion. That's what I understand by sympathy and empathy.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Thanks for answering that. So you're correct in relation to what you've just said there. So sympathy versus empathy. So sympathy is feeling compassion or sorrow for someone else's hardship or difficulties. So usually as humans, we are very sympathetic in nature. We could see maybe someone, for example, begging on the street, and then we'll say, oh my goodness, I feel bad for them. And then you carry on with your lives, and then you've kind of forgotten about the situation. So you feel compassion. As humans, being compassion is part of, I suppose, being human, whereas empathy takes it kind of like a step further, but actually experiencing and understanding the feelings through the person's lens. So how do you understand one's lens through their own life, sort of like, through their life and the structure in life? So it's about like taking a step back, trying to put yourself in their shoes, and then understanding why they, I suppose, ended up the way they are, or why they reacted the way they did. So sympathy can be a detached response. Like I mentioned earlier, you're feeling compassion for someone. Maybe you're on the way to work, you notice something like, oh, yeah, and that's it. You've said your piece and you've forgotten about it. Whereas if you're empathetic in nature, there's this active engagement that you have in trying to actually make a difference. You're intentional about like, making a difference in someone's life, trying to make a difference in, the environment or whatever it is that you're trying to be intentional about it because you're feeling the pain of the person, you know. So in other words, it means feeling for someone, sympathy is feeling for someone, empathy is feeling with someone. All right. So just to have that difference, because I know sometimes, apologies with the error with sympathy thing at the top there, but I just know sometimes when we talk about sympathy and empathy, a lot of discussion kind of comes different. You're intentional about like, making a difference in someone's life, trying to make a difference in, the environment or whatever it is that you're trying to be intentional about it because you're feeling the pain of the person, you know. So in other words, it means feeling for someone, sympathy is feeling for someone, empathy is feeling with someone. All right. So just to have that difference, because I know sometimes, apologies with the error with sympathy thing at the top there, but I just know sometimes when we talk about sympathy and empathy, a lot of discussion kind of comes up with a lot of people thinking that they're empathetic, whereas in hindsight, we're all sympathetic naturally, Um, however, a lot of people are not empathetic. So you need to kind of be able to understand the difference to know how best to navigate that. So empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It involves not only recognizing and acknowledging someone else's emotions, but also experiencing them to some extent. Empathy goes beyond mere sympathy or pity by actively engaging with and internalizing the emotions of others, leading to a deeper understanding of their perspective and experiences. So when we, I suppose, talk about empathy again, in a school setting, you're looking at a child, for example, that comes to school, consistently with maybe not doing their homework. Um, so again, not I'm not trying to acknowledge the behavior of not doing the homework. This is just an example. So you start noticing that okay, maybe the child used to do the homework before. Maybe there was no changes to there was nothing wrong before. They were, a good student. They'll come to class. They'll come early. They'll engage with, the curriculum in the classroom. And all of a sudden, you notice that, they're not engaging. They become very withdrawn. They're not having any discussion with anybody. So usually the way anyone would respond to that would be, oh, what happened? You ask the questions. Are you okay? Is everything okay? Blah, blah. And it's like, oh, no, I'm fine. And then that's about it. Whereas as a teacher, when you're trying to teach with empathy, you have to actually understand what is going on for this child outside of the school environment. Has there been a change in the home? Is there any sort of like maybe breakdown in the relationship going on at home? Have they had a new sort of changes in the family? You're really trying to be intentional about putting yourself in the perspective of this child, understanding what happened here, what has happened here for this child, and how do I, you know, put myself in their shoes to ensure that they have a positive interaction in the classroom setting. So just to give that bit of example, I suppose from a school setting, the difference. Sympathy when you experience that with a class. So in that example I gave where a child has been withdrawn all of a sudden, sympathy really is just when you acknowledge that, oh, okay, this child has changed, what's going on for them, but then you're not active about doing anything about it. You're just naming it and then you're, I suppose, moving forward and you've kind of forgotten about, the impact it's having on the child. So of course, as human, you're going to notice that something has happened. Now, it's now what makes you stand out as an educator and as a teacher is when you're able to now go back down to the lens of the individual. You're trying to understand it from I suppose, perspective of their lens, their family structure, what has happened here. This is unlike the boy. Let me get the parent in, try to see how best we can support this child in the school. There's something has changed at home. How best can we support that? But that is really the direction of where we're going. Okay. Is that okay? So when we talk about like empathy, there's three components to empathy. So we have cognitive empathy, we have emotional empathy, and then we have compassionate empathy. So cognitive empathy involves understanding and recognizing the emotions, thoughts, and perspective of others. It requires the ability to put oneself in someone else's shoes, to see the world from their point of view, and to grasp their feelings and thoughts intellectually. again, we'll go back to the example of the kid I was talking about, where, we're understanding, recognize, first of all, we're recognizing the emotion. We recognize that something has gone wrong here, you know, and then we're thinking, okay, what has happened? Like I said, has there been a breakdown in the home? Is there any sort of abuse going on in the home? Has there been maybe uh, mom is going through pregnancy? There's so many factors that can, I suppose, have an impact on a child's development. So we're trying to just put ourselves in that shoe of the individual and see the world from their point of view. A perfect example of the example I give with that is as adults that we are now as well, when we're going through changes in our lives or anything like that, the people that we tend to feel connected with are the ones that actually put themselves in our shoes, the ones that understand it from what is happening to us, the pain that we feel, you know, and there's no judgment, there's no, like there's no judgment or anything that makes you feel like you're less of a person when you speak to them. So I suppose that's the direction of what we're trying to achieve in a school setting as well. Put yourself in your shoes, understand it from the perspective, grasp their feeling. How are you feeling? Are you feeling low? What's going on? Do you want to talk about it? Let them cry, let them express their emotions, and just talk about it. So that's where the cognitive part of empathy is. The emotion aspect of empathy involves sharing and experiencing the emotion of others. So it is the capacity to feel what someone else is feeling, to resonate with their emotional state, and to respond with appropriate emotional reactions. So I suppose it's very easy for us to, like I said earlier, name emotions, but like, do we resonate with what is actually going on for the person? If the person is feeling very overwhelmed, do we understand the rationale behind the person's being overwhelmed? Do we respond appropriately? Do we say things like, you know, you need to leave the classroom, you're disrupting the classroom? Do we say things like, okay, let's go out for a walk, let's talk about what's going on for you, let's go into a different room, it's just about responding in an appropriate emotional reaction, taking a step back and trying to say, okay, there's something else happening here for this child, and it's nothing to do with my classroom, it's something else. How do I go back down to the level of the emotions child? You're aware there's been changes in the home. There've been changes in the home. You're aware that, something is happening. What are you going to do about it? So that's really, I suppose, comparing to sympathy, this third component is really where it kind of captures what makes it different. You can acknowledge someone's emotions, you can talk about it with them, you can go down to that level, but what are you doing about it? So at this point, you've noticed that the child is withdrawn. Have you spoken to your principal in the school about it? Have you tried to discuss this with the parents through your parent-teacher meetings? What have you done about it to make it positive sort of a positive expression for the child? So if a child feels like all they do is, you're just acknowledging their emotions consistently, but there's no changes, then eventually they probably would not feel comfortable to, want to discuss further with about their emotions. So it's about what can you do about it. So perfect example is speaking to your head, the school head about it, trying to see if it's the classroom setting. Is there bullying going on in the classroom? Are people picking on the child? Are people singling out the child as well? Is the child a bit odd and do they find it difficult to make friends? What are we doing about it? So just be mindful that, we want to be able to now make a difference. So these three components work together to form a holistic understanding and response to the emotion and experience of others, and enabling individuals to connect with and support each other effectively. So they all work hand in hand. The three components are very important. You can't have one and not have the other. You can't have two and not have the third one. They all work hand in hand. You need to be able to understand one's emotion. You need to be able to go back down to their level. And you also need to be able to actually do something about it as well, because you put yourself in their shoes. Like, if this was happening to me, if this was happening to my child, what would I do? Would I just acknowledge it and keep it moving? Or would I do something about it? And what tends to happen a lot with teachers or people in general is, you have kids, your kids go to a different school setting, and then you get maybe angry that a teacher is not doing the best that they can for your child. But we need to also be mindful that we're doing the exact same thing to other people's kids, so you just have to ensure that you're intentional about, if this was to be my child and I'm, the teacher, what would I want for this child? How would I want my child to be seen? What would I want the teachers to do for my child, for me to know that they're going at above and beyond for the child? Impact in their, I suppose, in their future as well, because they'll always remember teachers. I'm sure some of us, if we think back to when we were much younger in a school setting, there's always that one teacher that either we got on really well with, or the one that you just remember for being mean and not being nice. So it just shows you that it would always be a part of their, I suppose, their future. It was going to be a part of their story. So knowing that you're implementing empathy, it just improves the learning environment. So better mental health. So empathetic teachers can recognize signs of distress or emotional struggles in their students, and they can then provide support in contributing to improved mental health outcomes. So, like we said earlier, when we talk about empathetic teachers, you know, once a child knows that, when they go into the classroom setting, my teacher would know that there's something going on for me. It just makes their mental health better. It makes them look forward to going to school. It makes them, having a purpose in their lives as well, depending on the age of the child. It just gives them much better mental health. They're able to actually talk about the struggles. Sometimes when I see that, students are much more comfortable with their teachers than they would with their parents, and that's because that relationship has been built. They feel like they're able to not feel judged or any of that. So it improves the mental health. This is why empathy really matters in education. It also conflict resolution. So empathy helps teachers address conflict and misunderstandings effectively by considering the perspective and emotions of all parties involved. So it helps us address conflict and misunderstanding. So if there's any bullying in the classroom, if there's any issues going on in the classroom, I think the video we played earlier kind of showed how the students were talking about, like, they feel alone, they feel like, if someone can be empathetic towards them, it just makes things better. So if as a teacher, you see that students are not getting on in your classroom, there seems to be argument or fight or any of those sorts, you're able to actually resolve it, because then you have the awareness as to what's going on for them, as opposed to, not being clueless. A child is left by themselves to their own device in their corner, absolutely doing nothing. And as a teacher, we don't understand what's going on. We're just like, oh, he's having a bad day today, and leaving it as that, instead of I suppose trying to dig deep with what is going on here. How can I resolve the conflict? How can I make this better? It also matters because it promotes social and emotional learning. So teaching empathy helps students develop important social and emotional skills, such as perspective taking, communication, relationship building, which is essential for success in school and beyond. So we're teaching our students how to kind of improve their social and emotional skills, so when you understand what's going on for the child, you're able to actually coach them in being aware of their emotions, being aware of what's happening to them, and supporting them in like strategies and how best to manage it. So like, let's say, for example, a child has come into class very upset. Instead of saying, why are you crying? Da, 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 you're kind of saying, okay, it's okay that you're upset about this, of what's happened to you. That's okay. Do you want to try and, talk about it first next time, so we can, know, so it doesn't escalate further? There's just other ways you can try and just find to promote it, because I suppose we're not saying because you have empathy, you're ignoring behaviors, or you're ignoring a student that is being very difficult. No, all you're doing is just you're teaching them as well coping strategies. If I am upset, instead of me screaming and throwing my pen, you just let the teacher know that this is happening so I can address it with you. You're teaching them how to manage their emotions. And that's something that, teachers teach students without realizing it. So as teachers, we do so much. You do so much than you realize, but these are all, the expectation and what the kids are understanding of you as a teacher. So you're promoting the perspective thinking. So why are you thinking this way? Okay, because John doesn't want to play with you, doesn't mean John does not like you. maybe John is just having a bad day. So then as a student, then you're understanding the perspective of another student. You're not thinking, oh, this needs to be when I want this is when I can have this. You're teaching your students as well, just communication skills, building relationship, and those sort of skills are very important. And this is why empathy is very important in education. I'm sure at this stage, everyone is like, yes, the emphasis is on the teachers to implement this, how to do this, how do you not do this, but there's always barriers to everything we do. There's a lot of, barriers to how to actually be empathetic. So in Nigeria, for example, you're on the way to work. You've had someone has annoyed you on your way to work, for example. Of course, you're going into work and you're already stressed out. So automatically, the people that are going to get the first brunt of your anger are the students if they do something. So this can happen because we're in an environment where there's always something happening. There's a trigger. If it's not while you're going to work, it's a phone call in the morning from somebody. Somebody has done something. It's your neighbor. So of course, it's extremely difficult when you're being told to be empathetic when your surrounding and your environment does not help with it. One of the barriers is obviously work-related stress. So teachers often experience high level of stress due to demand of their profession. So heavy workload, time pressure, and the responsibility of meeting diverse student needs. You're stressed out, you're burnt out, you're exhausted, and you're overwhelmed. So all this would impact the well-being of the teachers. Of course, this has if anything, this would be number one related sort of barrier to showing empathy as humans and also just in our day-to-day lives because we have so much going on for us. We're thinking about 1 million things. We're trying to get this done. We're trying to get that done. We're thinking about our personal sort of like issues. So of course, when you then go to school, you don't have time to be empathetic. But this is where the intentionality of it comes in. Everybody is going to be stressed out at some point in their lives, but you have to always remember that the impact you have on the kids will always remain with them like forever. Even though that stress that you're stressed about is part of your journey, you've probably even forgotten about it. But this child will always remember the teacher that comes into class extremely overwhelmed, extremely stressed out, not nice, always screaming and shouting, whatever, that looks like for you. They would always remember that because your role as a teacher has a major impact, a significant impact actually to to the future of these kids. All right. So emotional labor. So teachers are required. Teaching requires a significant emotional labor as educators must navigate complex interpersonal dynamic. So you're managing like challenging behavior of students, you're providing emotional support to students, you're experiencing difficulties in your home or your personal lives, like I said, you're constantly managing emotions of literally everybody. So that can take a toll on your mental health as well, where, like I mentioned earlier, you're just emotionally overwhelmed and you don't have anything to give. And this is why the role of a teacher is one of the most rewarding role that you can have, but also one of the most difficult job to have as well, because you're dealing with different students and different needs. So of course you're going to have days where you don't have the capacity or even the emotional, capacity to support these children. So because you're thinking about one child, then maybe one child is fine. The next day you're coming, another child is having their own issues as well. So there's always going to be something that would impact our barrier to empathy. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this is where the having to reflect. Reflection is key in empathy. How do you reflect? How are you able to reflect your day? Once you finish your day today, a school day, do you go home and think about it? Do you reflect on your mood that day? Do you reflect on how maybe you can do things better next time? Of course, there are going to be days because you're human where reflection is out the window. But as part of your role, reflection, reflection, reflection. You need to reflect on your day. Make sure you're trying to improve the outcome of your children, of the students. You're trying to improve the outcome of, the education system. It's one teacher at a time. It's not going to be a system that changes it. You need to work on, the individual. So lack of support, huge. That's a huge barrier. So teachers usually feel undervalued in any part of the world. It doesn't matter how much you're paying a teacher, you never get paid enough for your role. So of course that plays a huge that plays a huge sort of like um a huge role in also the barrier because you're coming into school and maybe your salary is not even enough. Maybe you have enough just to go from work to school from home to school. So like for you, you're just thinking, like, why should I go above and beyond for this profession if I'm not being valued? So you have inadequate resources, no training, limited professional development opportunities, lack of recognition. So like you do so much work and then your manager doesn't even recognize the work that you do. You feel a sense of isolation and frustration. All this are very much valid for any teacher that's facing it. You know, it's very sad that that happens, but this is unfortunately one of the factors in, being a teacher and one of the barriers as well in what you have to face as a teacher. So, you just feel like you're not supported. Your colleagues are not maybe supportive, just so much sort of no support whatsoever. So of course, if you have no support, like how are you going to show empathy? Like, why? Why would you show empathy? Because why should you? Again, but that's where, if we go back to being a teacher, the significant role that we play in a child's life, in their future, in their sort of like upbringing, you just have to remember that we're not doing it per se for the administrators or the schools. We're doing it for the individual child that would always remember the impact you made to their lives. So barriers again is stigma surrounding mental health. So I suppose there's a huge stigma generally anyways when we talk about mental health issues. But in the teaching professions, it's very difficult to talk about it because you feel a sense of judgment. Maybe even if you say something like that, the school head or school principal might not even support you with that. So you just feel isolated. You feel like, what's the point? You're burnt out for yourself. How do you show up for these children when you yourself are burnt out? So that's a huge stigma as well around mental health. How to kind of go about that is, trying to just finding that support system. An example is the schools in Lagos, sort of like sessions that we have where we focus so much on like teachers' mental health. We're trying to support teachers and just discussing what's going on for them, how best to manage situation. But that is how, as a teacher, you're intentionally trying to, support yourself. So work-life balance. So balancing demands of teaching with personal responsibilities and self-care can be challenging, particularly for educators who feel pressured to constantly prioritize their work over their own well-being. A lack of adequate time for rest, relaxation, or leisure activities can contribute to feeling of burnout and dissatisfaction. That's a huge barrier as well, because like you're not able to have a work-life balance. You start work at 9, you leave your house at 6 a.m. And by the time you get home, 7, 8 p.m., you're sleeping again, you do it again the next day. So that is also huge. These are something that, no one can control, unfortunately, because that's more governmental. It's not really something that you can control on the level that we're discussing, but it's just being aware. I think the main thing here is like, do you have the awareness? Are you aware that, you're getting overwhelmed? Are you reflecting on your practice? What are you doing about it? Necessarily, when I say what are you doing about it, you don't need to potentially like not work or whatever, it's about just how do you find a balance? How do you make sure that you understand that this is happening for you and what is the balance for you? Do you know what I mean? Do you make sure that when you get home, you don't do any work, you turn off your laptop and you go straight to bed? Or do you make sure, when you start work in the morning, you have breakfast before you start the work? It's just about finding a routine that works for each person. What works for you? How do you balance the workload so you don't feel overwhelmed and pressured? So that's also all the barriers that teachers face on a daily, trying to implement empathy. So you can see that it's not easy, to actually be intentional about it. It's not easy, and no one ever said it was going to be easy, but it's about taking it one step at a time, reflecting on your practice, being intentional about your day, trying to find a routine that works for you as well as work for your school setting as well, but making sure you come first. So who comes first here? You're coming first in, in trying to better yourself.
but I don't take homework to do anymore. Now, ma'am, for teachers, I know this is a little bit, it might not really relate with empathy. Now, ma'am, maybe at the end of your speech, at the end of your presentation, can you give us a few tips on how to effectively manage the work-life balance so it does not really take a toll on our mental health? Because we have places that we have a lot of high pressure environments that the management show no empathy. It's like a garrison. So maybe at the end of your presentation, can you please give us a few tips for educators on how to manage it so it doesn't tell and take a toll on our mental health?
Yeah, perfect. So I could do that at the end. Is that okay? Just to kind of go through.
Yes, please. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Do you mind reminding me just in case I forget, but just
no
to
problem.
come back to that question? Okay. Is that another question or is that it?
Yes, that's it, at least for now.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you guys for being interactive. Okay, so we go to mental health and education, and how do they both go hand in hand, So mental health in the context of education refers to the psychological well-being and emotional resilience of students, teachers, and the broader school community. It encompasses a range of factors, including emotional regulation, stress management, social connectedness, and coping skills that contributes to individual overall mental well-being and ability to thrive in educational setting. So practically what this is saying is, from an educational perspective, mental health, kind of like the psychological well-being and emotional resilience of students and teachers, has a huge factor to play in, the educational, how you thrive in an educational setting. It's important to know that although we keep talking about empathy and all that, mental health is also a huge part of empathy. If there is barrier to your mental health, there's no way you can show empathy. All right. So in an educational context, mental health is not just the absence of mental illness, but also the presence of positive psychological attributes and resources that support learning and academic success. It involves creating supportive environments that promote emotional safety, foster social connection, and prioritize the holistic well-being of the members of the school community. So just to go back to the question that we asked again, really, from an educational context, your role as an educator is really just promoting, emotional safety, supportive environment. That is huge for students. Students know that you're not there to solve their problems. They know that when they leave your school setting, they're going home to their problems or whatever it is that's going on for them, obviously. But it's just from an educational context, if there's an absence of, psychological attributes, it has a huge impact on like creating supportive environments and, emotional safety for our students. So mental health plays a crucial role in shaping a positive education. Here's how: academic achievement. So mental health significantly influences students' ability to learn, concentrate, and perform academically. Positive mental health supports cognitive functioning, memory retention, and problem-solving skills, leading to improved academic and achievement and success. Sorry now. So what this is trying to say here is it plays a huge part in academic achievement. When a child is doing very well, of course, they might get support at home. But when you see kids that are doing really bad at home, they need that support in the school setting to improve their academic achievement. If a child feels supported by a teacher, they feel like, the teachers understand them. It kind of supports them in like memory retention, problem solving skills, trying to understand how to solve a maths. It just really helps in shaping a child's education system. It helps with their emotional well-being as well. A positive education system prioritizes the emotional well-being of students, creating supportive environments where students feel safe, valued, and understood. Huge. So emotional well-being. Are your students feeling valued? Do they feel safe? Do they feel understood? And when you say a student feel understood from their own lens, not from the lens of, so you might have 10 students, 8 of them might be very similar in their character. They come in, say, good morning, teacher. They sit down, they eat their breakfast, they do whatever they need to do, and it's all fine. But then you have the other 2 that consistently makes it very difficult, So it's about how do you understand them? How do they feel safe? How do they know that, when I come in, this teacher understands me? Even without words, you have students that maybe might not be able to even maybe communicate, maybe due to their age. But what humans feel their emotions. A child would know if their caregiver is, caring for them positively. And the same as students, when they feel safe, valued, and understood, it supports them in in their mental health and how I suppose it impacts their education. Positive relationships. So mental health impacts students' ability to form and maintain positive relationship with peers and teachers. A supportive school environment that promotes social connectedness and interpersonal skills contributes to students' social emotional development and overall mental well-being. So again, mental health impacts student ability to form a relationship with their peers. So if a child mental health is positive, if a teacher's mental health is positive, they're able to understand what is going on in the school setting. They're able to be supportive. They're able to ensure that the child feels connected with everybody else in the classroom. Behavioral health. So mental health influences students' behavior and engagement in school. Addressing mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, or trauma can reduce disruptive behaviors, can improve attendance, and enhance classroom participation. Again, we have a lot of behavioral sort of factors that has a huge part to play in our school setting, So like kids that can be anxious, they can have autism, they can have ADHD, they can have different sort of mental health or behavioral issues that's impacting their behavior. So like if it's been addressed and they're being supported, it has a huge impact on their behavioral health. It supports them in participating in class. Now you're not going to solve the mental health diagnosis, nor are you going to solve the behavioral diagnosis. But what you tend to do is you are supporting your student to create a more positive and productive learning environment. All right. So a positive education system incorporates mental health promotion and early intervention strategies to prevent the onset of mental health problem and address issues proactively. So for teachers, I'm not sure how the school setting works, but if we have any directors or any heads or anything that are in this session today, just be mindful that just doing a bit of program around a mental health support day, a discussion group around a teacher's mental health, just preventing it and finding intervention plays a huge role in the long run for your school itself, and the growth of your school as well. If teachers feel valued, if they feel heard, if they feel I'm supported around this, then of course you'll have no issues about your school closing down or anything of that sort that could be an issue. So just if there's any principal head or anybody in the session today, or anyone that is able to kind of discuss this with whoever it is that they report to, just around just finding initiative, an hour every quarter or an hour per term, just whatever it is, just to acknowledge mental health workload, support for your teachers, because in turn, if your teachers feel supported, then they are going to support their kids as well. So the reason why we find teachers that are burnt out or teachers that cannot show empathy is because they don't feel supported. So if they don't feel supported, how do you expect them to go into a classroom and also be to support the students? So we're thinking about it from a broader perspective, just something 1 hour per quarter, whatever it is, put a leaflet around it, just do something that you're intentionally trying to support your teachers. And mental health influences the overall climate and culture of a school, impacting factors such as peer relationship, bullying prevention efforts, and student engagement. So when you talk about mental health, when you implement it in your school setting, the culture of your school changes because you are now having a school whereby teachers feel supported. In turn, they support the student. Students also feel supported. In turn, they ensure that there's no bullying. They're not trying to take advantage of anybody else. It just makes it more inclusive and to empower people to thrive as well. So just, I suppose, again, I keep reiterating it to the heads because as teachers, sometimes you don't have the power or even the control per se to kind of implement these things. But maybe after the session today, if you're not a school head and you think there's a head that will be okay to implement something like this, just do a mental health day for teachers. What is mental health? Just have a discussion about it. And so they feel heard. And that's really it. That's where it starts from. All right. So impact of empathy on student mental health. So what we tend to see is once you have a teacher or a school culture that's empathetic, research shows that, it demonstrates a strong positive correlation between teacher empathy and student mental health. So it's positive. Once a student feel empathetic, once a teacher shows a student empathy, it has a huge impact on their mental health. Positive correlation, no issues. They talk to you about the problems. They know that when I go into that classroom, I like this teacher. I'm not going to disrupt the class. The simple things is just making sure they feel seen. Once a child feels seen and they feel heard, it becomes like the sky's their limit from there on. Once what I say to teachers or people in general is when you see a behavior that is very pronounced, or you see a behavior that is very much in your face, there's so much more to that. What you're seeing is the behavior. You're not seeing the thoughts. You're not seeing the feelings of the person. You're not seeing why they are the way they are. So just being positive, showing positive, unconditional regard, positive regard, showing empathy. All those are very, promotes positive correlation. It reduces stress levels. So students who perceive their teachers as empathetic report lower level of stress and anxiety. So you're going to class, you know that your teachers are going to support you. You don't feel anxious. You're fine. Like you're happy that you're just in a good place. So it promotes it reports lower level of stress and anxiety, improved emotional regulation. So empathetic teachers help students develop other emotional regulation skills, leading to self-control and resilience. So you're teaching them how to manage what's going on for them. You're giving them coping strategies. You're including them in their plan. So what I forgot to mention actually, Antonia, earlier, is like trying to include a child in their plan is also very positive in improving, showing empathy. So you're not coming up with what you think would work. You're being intentional about what will work for the child. So of course, if you have a child that's young and that's nonverbal, for example, then you can't ask them for their opinion. But where you have kids that maybe they're teenagers that can express what's going on for them, you're including them in their supports, making sure they're aware that this is the support, this is what we're going to try to do. Let's see how that works for you. And that sense of autonomy and independence, is positive. They're able to then, want to go to class. They're able to express what's going on for them and things like that. Enhanced well-being. Students in empathetic classroom environment experience higher overall well-being and satisfaction with school. And number 5, the effect of teachers' empathy on student mental health extend beyond the classroom and can have lasting impact on students' emotional development. Okay. So how can we improve empathy in the classroom? This is for all the questions that people have asked. So active listening. So you need to demonstrate empathy by actively listening to your student without judgment or interruption. Pay attention to what they're saying and what they're not saying, their body language, their tone of voice, understand their thoughts, their feelings, and their needs. So again, putting yourself in their shoes as opposed to having your judgment of the situation. Oh, you're using drugs, you're a bad child, you're using drugs, this is going to happen to you, things like that. So we're trying to just active listen to, understand and not to reply. So you're understanding the situation. You're not having a response already before they say anything, So just demonstrating that active listening, person-centered approach, the person-centered, putting the person in the middle and finding the supports and making sure they understand what's going on and what they think is best for them. As much as that might sound like you're giving the children the control, you're not. What you're doing is actually giving the control to both parties, where you're telling them that I can hold you accountable now because you've told me that this is what would work for you, and I'm gonna try that, So let's see it, because then if it doesn't work, I can go back and say, but you were aware of this plan. Do you know what I mean? Validation and affirmation. So empathetic teachers validate and affirm student experiences, emotions, and perspective. So they acknowledge student feelings without dismissing them, and they create a safe and supportive space for expression. So if you notice that the child has done something that they maybe haven't done before or it's new, just acknowledge it and be like, oh, I saw that you finished your homework and you haven't done it all week. Well done. Keep doing that. Once they feel that they want to continue to, make you proud as well. So just ensuring that you're validating and affirming the emotions of your student. So individualized support. I know I spoke about that earlier. So what works for one person doesn't work for the other person. So as a teacher, showing empathy in the classroom is providing individualized support for the person. So I have a difficult child that, maybe screams and cries every morning, whatever it is, what works for this child? What are the triggers? What are the patterns? What can I do to ensure that this child feels supported in the classroom? So you're tailoring the child needs and the circumstances to, to support them. You take your time to get to know the students on a personal level. You need to know what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and what they're interested in. So every child has strengths. Some kids, it could be that their strengths are maybe sitting down and then actually taking stuff in. Some kids, it's maybe every 1 hour they need to go to the toilet before they can listen to what you're saying. So the point I'm making is some things are not feasible, and I suppose I want this webinar to be as feasible and practical as possible. But whatever individualized support means to you is, I suppose, trying to just make sure you're supporting them, understanding their strength, not what John's strength is or what Antonia's strength is. No, it's about what is the strength of this person I'm working with. What works for this person? What do they do that is one of their strengths that other people don't have? Are they good with art? Are they good with writing? Are they good with reading? And focusing on that strength, making sure they feel heard within that strength that they're showing. And then whatever challenges that they have, supporting them through those challenges as well. So all those things improve empathy in the classroom as well. Flexible and responsive teaching. So empathetic teachers adapt their teaching approaches and strategies based on student feedback, interest, and learning style. So as teachers, maybe by the end of each year, or as directors or principals, just try to do flexible and responsive teaching. So what are your students think works for them? How do you foster like a dynamic learning environment? What do they think can be done better? Do they want more case studies? Just trying to improve how you teach as well. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to change overnight, but if a student feels like, oh, this teacher actually is intentional about making an impact, that would improve, empathy in the classroom. Using empathetic language and communication style. So being compassionate, using supportive language, offering words of encouragement, reassuring them, demonstrating genuine care and concern for their well-being. And then understanding and perspective taking. The empathy enables teachers to understand and appreciate student perspective, even when they differ from their own. And the good example one was the drug sort of question. Yes, there's a judgment around drug use. There's a judgment around those sort of stigma. But even though you might not understand the perspective of the student, you just try to see what through their eyes and their lens. That shows empathy. You're understanding that, you are the way you are because of what has happened to you. Now, you don't need to say this to them, but this is what is going on in your mind. So when you have an interaction with them, you have respect for them. You are, supportive of what's going on for them and things like that. Okay. Empathetic teachers facilitate constructive conflict resolution and mediation process. So they help students navigate disagreement, misunderstanding. So if you think there's anything going on in the classroom, you notice that maybe your students are not talking to each other, whatever it is, the fact that you actually already observed that shows that you have empathy, you're able to understand the changes in the classroom. So how do you resolve the conflict? How do you support them? How do you let them understand each other's point of view? How do you ensure that they show empathy and compassion while resolving the problem as well? And the last part of this is modeling empathy. So you need to model it. It's easy to talk about it. It's easy for me to say, do this, do that, but you have to model it. It has to be in your being. You have to be able to be a role model. You have to demonstrate kindness from your day-to-day. Even though somebody has annoyed you in traffic before coming to school, you still have to show compassion. You have to understand the interaction that you have with your students. You have to cultivate a culture of empathy and inclusivity. So just model empathy naturally. When you model it, when you are it, everything else becomes easier. Of course, there are going to be days where you don't necessarily have solutions. Empathy is not about finding solution. Empathy is just trying to change who you are, how you see the world, how you communicate with people, and things like that. So in light of what you've learned today, can you share any instances in your teaching where a child demonstrated a certain behavior in your class and how you responded? What would you do differently now that you're aware about empathy? So can anyone say that? I might just take maybe one of that because we're kind of running on time. I'm trying to round up.
Yeah, so educators, please join this discussion. Because of time, each person has 20 seconds to answer this question. And then we'll go back to our question on work-life balance, maintaining work-life balance in a high-pressure work setting that there's no empathy rate from the management. So educators, participants, please let's join in this discussion. The question is displayed on our screens. So we can mute ourselves one after the other and share our little knowledge and talk about this.
In light of what you've learned today, if there's anything that maybe keeps flagging or you keep thinking about that you're like, oh, actually, this would be a perfect example of what I did in the past. Now that I know about empathy, can I do something else that's different? It doesn't have to be a big story, just anything, just so you can, I suppose I'm kind of sure that everybody has an idea of what empathy is all about.
Okay, if we do not want to participate via OJ, we could send in our messages and we respond. Ma'am, while we're waiting for people to join in this discussion, can we go back to the question earlier asked as regards maintaining nice work-life balance?
Yeah, perfect.
That would foster good mental health for teachers and educators in places that are high pressure environments. So how can we achieve that? What tips can you give for educators to maintain proper work-life balance so one does not suffer against that?
Yeah. So I suppose that question obviously can be quite tricky because, as the head, there's so much that they kind of put on us or on teachers to get things done. But what you can do in that situation is that practical is making sure that you prioritize your tasks. So like for each day, there's a task that is priority, right? So it's not everything that needs to be done on the same day. If you can prioritize your task and get something that you know that needs to be done, you're doing that first before you're doing anything else. Second thing as well is just try not to take your work home. Yes, again, these are practical things that sometimes isn't possible, but it's about you being intentional about these things as well. Because like everybody says, I see this on the on social media where they're like, the minute you pass away, they're going to replace you very soon, So, and that's the reality of it is life goes on, so you have to be intentional about prioritizing your task, not taking on what you cannot handle. If you know that it's too much for you, communicate in a way that you're not saying no, you're not saying that I'm not doing this, you're doing it in a way that is very constructive of, at the moment I'm working on this. Is it okay if, I take this project on board, for example, in the next few weeks, once I find a balance, you're trying to just find that balance where the expectation isn't overwhelming you. Don't take your work home. Whatever it is, do finish your work at work and you go back to school the next day and start all over again. So, because that way you're able to then differentiate home from work. What tends to happen is people are so stressed out that they bring their workload home. So then you don't have you don't have a room for self-care. You don't have a place where you can actually just have that's not stressful. So you just find somewhere that you're like, okay, even if I finish at 6 p.m., I'm not going to take this home. I'm going to make sure I finish at 6 p.m. and I'm going to not bring it home to me. So home will be like my sanctuary. Home is going to be where I feel some sort of self-care, I think I'm not sure what support the Nigerian school have in place, but I think just having other school teachers where you can kind of talk about what works for them as well. Because you might see maybe in every profession, there's always that one person that looks like they're doing well, they don't complain about anything, they get their work done, they're in a good place. So you're speaking to them as well, building that rapport as to, okay, how do you manage this? What works for you? What, like, let me try and see if I can implement this. Like, just trying to see from your peers, building that rapport as well to see what works for them. But I think the main thing there is, if your principal or whoever it is isn't supportive of, the pressure, you have to support yourself by being structured. All you can do to yourself is structure your time, very good time management, sticking to the time that you're going to leave every day, making sure when you come in the morning, maybe for example, you have your breakfast. The days you have a break, do a quick walk in the school ground just to give yourself 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is, just to give yourself a space outside of the stressor, and those are things that you have to do intentionally. Your school head probably will not provide that, but you're just intentional about it. I'm going to start at 9 o'clock. I'm going to make sure I take my lunch at 10 o'clock or whatever for 10 minutes, even though I'm trying to do something else. I'm going to make sure I eat my lunch. I have to make sure I eat my lunch. You eat a lunch, you finish on time. So things like that, just practical things that you can try do. Because in this part of the world, I can advise and say maybe speak to your head. But I know in Nigeria it's a different setting entirely. So maybe speak to them might potentially put you on the radar. So you don't want to do that. But you're just trying to be intentional about how you manage your time, how you manage your priorities, how you manage your task, how you ensure that you finish at a certain time, how you ensure that you don't take on too much that you cannot do. How do you delegate the work as well? Is there any assistant that can support you? So delegation and things like that. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Finally, ma, under 1 minute, Mr. Moriah Abbas asked a question. He asked, what can be done as an educator when classes are on and a child just shouts to obstruct the flow of the lesson? What can we do? Well, with this new knowledge on empathy and working with mental health, what can we do? Let's say the child has no prior experience of mental health crisis, or might just want to be naughty and just want to obstruct the flow. What do you think we can do to such a
situation? I think just to go back to the Barry, I think there was a part there around how to improve empathy in the classroom. So like trying to just that individualized support, if a child just out of nowhere starts to scream, is there anything more than maybe if it's a behavioral issues and they're just screaming outside of the noise, when everybody's has left the class, try to speak with them like, oh, what's going on for you? I've noticed that this happens every time on this time, whatever. I have to teach a class and I want to support you as well to make sure that you don't disrupt in the class. Trying to know that you see them, you're listening, active listener, you're listening to their needs, you're taking attention to their tone of voice, you're hearing what they're saying. You might have kids that might say something, but that's not what they mean. They can say, oh, I don't care. Oh, I'm going to disrupt any. You know what I mean? And then that would trigger you and you're like, how dare you, So no, you listen to, okay, if someone is talking that way, what's going on for them? What are their thoughts? What are they feeling? So you're putting yourself in their shoes. Empathy is about putting yourself in their shoes. Empathy is not about acknowledging that it's okay for a child to scream in the classroom. You're just putting yourself in their shoes. You're understanding what's going on for them. You're using empathetic language. You're flexible in your teaching. Just trying to put them in between and saying, okay, what's going on here? This is always happening. How can we support you here? Is there anything going on at home? I'm trying to ensure that everybody else is not disrupted. And not doing it where it's obvious. Maybe on a day where they don't expect that you ask to speak to them. That's when you do is call them in a room that there's nobody else there and just checking. It's like, how are you? As opposed to, how dare you speak like that in the classroom? No, because then you can't show empathy if you're being very, rigid in your approach. You're really just trying to put yourself in the person's shoes, understanding from their lens, still making sure you have boundaries and rules in your classroom, because that's obviously required. You need to have that. But what you're doing as an empathetic teacher is putting yourself in their shoes, trying to understand the perspective, trying to, be compassionate, and then but just making sure you're creating a culture of like, this is not acceptable. What can we do to ensure this doesn't happen again? Like, what makes you scream in the classroom? That maybe, is there a trigger? Is there something I need to know so I know for next time? you're just trying to include them in the conversation and things like that. All right.
Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Folashade Olutu.
Yeah. So
Okay,
just
my dear.
before I play the last video, just
Okay.
self-care, the importance of self-care, going back to the question that the lady asked earlier about how do you prioritize your tasks? Self-care, an example is the training, the webinar that you're on today, that is part of self-care, you know, just being intentional about like promoting your physical needs, your emotional needs, your timekeeping, looking after yourself. Just be very, very intentional about it. Again, if you feel like it's getting overwhelming and all that, try to get support from your peers. Try to talk about it. Make sure you're reflecting on your practice every day. What can you do better? What did you try to do? How did you manage it? So self-care is obviously one of the most important aspects of empathy as well. Because if you don't care for yourself, you cannot care for anybody else. So empathy is thrown out the window if you don't have self-care. So you need to just be intentional about bettering yourself in the school setting. All right. So I just played this last video just around how teachers change lives, and then I'll just do a last minute roundup. Is that okay? So hopefully this.
Teachers matter because we learn different things every day.
They push you to always believe that even if something is hard, you can still achieve it.
They're constantly encouraging me, and they're trying to make me reach that stretch goal.
My teacher has taught me to worry about my education, what life will be in my future if I don't finish high school.
Mr. Coffee's taught me how to count.
She's definitely taught me to not be biased.
He's taught me some great science.
She makes me look for more sources.
For me to see that somebody was just like me and was able to succeed, she has inspired me to be a better person.
Having a great teacher makes things possible.
He's my dad, he's my mom, he's my friend, he's my psychiatrist.
He kind of believes in me unconditionally. So that way it's easier to believe in yourself.
Quick sort of like feedback, or is everyone happy to end the session now? But thank you to everyone. I suppose just to acknowledge that teachers are doing such great work, and just to remember that your hard work is not unseen. The students are always going to remember the teachers that made an impact in their lives. So although your head might not notice it, other people might not notice it, but just remember that the student that you're supporting remembers the support that you've given them. So in light of that, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining on a Saturday afternoon, because I can understand that everybody has different things that they're doing. So thank you so much for joining. If there's any questions that you have that maybe came up for you while this is going on, you can send an email to schools in Lagos. Their email address is there at the top. And then I'm happy to answer any questions if needed. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining today. Thank you.
And thank you, Mrs. Folashade Olutu. Thank you, our guest speaker.